Uh, oh, thank you. Um, and today we have Dr. Gleb Cypersky with us. I'll let him introduce himself. He's going to talk about revolutionizing settlements. I appreciate that you're here today, and I will continue to let people in as they come in. Thank you so much, Dr. Gleb. Take it away.
Thank you. Appreciate it, James. And welcome, everyone. So, let's talk about the science of justifying non-economic damages and emotional distress, invisible pain, and compensation. That's what we'll focus on. Now, you might have seen my article in the Maine State Bar Association Journal on this topic. And I've been doing this work for over 26 years now. Yeah, it's been a while. Since 1999, I have a PhD in behavioral economics and looking at how people make decisions. And part of how they make decisions in evaluating non-economic damages and emotional distress. I also presented earlier about for the Maine State Bar Association on bias and decision making. And so that's another area of expertise for me. So I've been doing expert witness work on this topic for a very long time now. I'm quite familiar with how to present convincing evidence of effective evaluations of non-economic damages, meaning physical distress that's not obvious and emotional distress. So that's what we'll be talking about today. I hope that's why you're here. Now, the recording, if you're watching this on the recording, and if you want my resources, you can go to the link that's below my name, tinyurl.com/DAEEVENT. So again, that's going to be tinyurl.com/DAEEVENT. That's my company name, Disaster Avoidance Experts, DAE, and then of event. So I'll put it for convenience in the chat. So again, tinyurl.com/DAEEVENT. And that will be a number of expert witness reports that will show you how to have a good expert witness report. And of course, you don't need to hire an expert witness, but for you as a lawyer, how to manage evaluation of emotional compensation. But as an expert witness, that's the kind of documents I have, as well as my book on this topic. So that's what the talk will be about. Now, from a logistics perspective, you should see my slides appear right next to me and below me. If you don't see them fully, you'll want to click on the View button on the top right of your screen and then select Speaker Full Screen. So you'll be able to select Speaker as one of your options, so don't select Gallery. And then on the bottom, select Full Screen. And that way you'll be able to see me fully. Okay, and you'll see the slides fully. So, what will we be covering? Understanding invisible pain and emotional distress. So non-economic damages, of course, have to do with visible pain, but visible pain is something that juries can understand more easily. Now, if someone comes to the courtroom all banged up and so on, that's easier to see. The difficulty with non-economic damages, what I want to focus on, is invisible pain. Invisible physical pain, chronic pain, so on, and emotional, mental distress. Then we'll talk about some of the challenges for current methods that are used, which is subjective evaluation. Just subjectively telling the jury, how would you feel if you were in that situation? Is the essential strategy along with storytelling around the victim that most lawyers pursue. We'll talk about a much, much more effective approach using the QALY metric, quality adjusted life years in legal evaluations. And that is a Daubert evaluated high quality methodology. So this is the Daubert standard because it's widely used in peer reviewed journals. So it is the standard of academic evidence in a variety of fields. Then I'll give you some real world examples of how this is useful. And then some strategies for presenting quality in court. So that's going to be the last part of the presentation for you to think about. All right. Anytime you have questions, pop them into the chat and Depending on the nature of the question, I'll either leave it to the end or if I can answer it quickly, I'll answer it during the presentation. All right. So let's talk about non-academic damages, understanding what they are. Emotional ones, intense sadness can be one type of non-academic damage, grief, anger, anxiety, panic attacks. Those can all represent forms of non-economic damage that result from an injury. Cognitive are going to be negative thoughts, ruminations, difficulty concentrating, fogginess, and so on. Those are also in the cognitive sphere, emotional and cognitive sphere. So those are, of course, have to do with emotions. Now, physical components are going to be things like headaches, muscle tension, sleep disturbances, fatigue, GI issues, hair loss, and chronic pain. I'm not going to go in depth into the chronic pain. Chronic pain has a number of some subcomponents, and that's going to be essentially something that we can talk about more fully if you have questions. But all these other things people tend to forget about as issues. So, and obviously included within chronic pain is disability, like inability to function in some way or other. So usually non-economic damages combine emotional, cognitive, and physical components. And the more of them you can get to combine as an injury attorney, if you're thinking about a personal injury attorney, the more of an effective, justifiable settlement you can request for your client. Impact on life, on personal life, strained relationships, social withdrawal. So those are also non-economic damages. And people tend to forget about that. So those all have costly impacts. Strained relationships and social withdrawal. Professional life, decreased job performance, increased absenteeism. Those are also forms of non-academic damages that you can add to your claim. Overall quality of life, reduced pleasure and satisfaction, and risk of conditions like major depressive disorder or PTSD. Those are all things that can add to the kind of claims that you can be making for non-economic damages. So that's the kind of non-economic damages that we're talking about here. So this is the focus of today's presentation. I hope that's what you came here for. So let's talk about the issues with traditional subjective evaluations. There's a lack of standardization. There's no scientific basis for them, inconsistent criteria for assessing distress, variabilities in tools and scales used. It's dependent on your rhetorical skills. I mean, you might be great, but the opposing counsel might be great. So it's just going to be a matter of he said, she said, or he or she spun a better story, better arguments. That's not great. This demonstrates the need for reliable and objective methods. And that's what we'll talk about today. But first, let's talk about some of the problems with subjective methods. There's a lot of variability, personal differences in how people respond to non-academic damages, to emotional distress, to physical distress. Diverse emotional responses to similar events are common. The influence of personal history and context can be challenging. Cultural factors, there's differences in the varieties of expressing distress. So especially, let's say you're in Maine and people in Maine might not have as much familiarity with the way that people in some other cultures express distress. So that's going to be something for you to think about. And so it depends on your local community and how diverse it is and how much familiarity it has with other cultures ranging from, I don't know, Asian cultures to US Southern culture in expressing distress. Different coping mechanisms and support systems can make a real difference in how someone deals with this distress. That shows the need for a more scientific, standardized approach that courts can say, well, this is what the standard is across a number of demographics. And so we're not going to just look at each individual person and try to guess what's going on in their heads, and especially since they'll have an incentive to overrepresent the kind of things that they're experiencing in their emotional distress, in their chronic pain, sleep fatigue, all of this other stuff. So can we have a more standardized approach? That's why you need an objective measure. A scientific approach that incorporates quantitative metrics ensures reliability across a variety of cases and meets the Daubert standard, which enhances your credibility in court. for expert witnesses, of course. But just in general, even if you are not using an expert witness, you need to be thinking about the Daubert standard as, hey, is this acceptable evidence to present in court? How would the judge evaluate this sort of evidence? How would the jury think about it? Even though the jury doesn't really know about the Daubert standard, but the judge can accept or reject certain types of evidence that you present. So let's talk about the quality metric. So this is a very effective method of presenting non-economic damages. It stands for quality adjusted life year. So quality adjusted life year, that's what the quality metric is about. And the quality metric allows you to combine measures of quantity and quality of life into one single unitary measure. So, of course, if you're thinking about non-economic damages, they're all about impacting the quality and quantity of life, how long someone lives, and with what kind of quality of life. So, quality is exactly the solution to addressing non-economic damages. How do we calculate quality? One quality is 1 year of life in perfect health for an appropriate demographic. Obviously, it's going to be different for someone who's 60 than for someone who is 15 and someone who's 5. So it's for your appropriate demographic, it's 1 year of life in perfect health, whatever the demographic is. Half of a quality is 1 year of life at 50% quality. Just so that you're thinking about from an intuitive perspective, what does that mean? 50% quality. So the typical example that's used is blindness. Blindness is assumed to take away about half of your quality of life. So that is an example of something that, hey, if you lived life blind for a year, that would take away about half of your quality of life. So that's quality. And I'll go through details of it, but I just want to give you an intuition for what it would mean for quality. And of course, someone who is, let's say, in a coma has, pretty much almost no quality while they're in a coma. So that would be an example. Someone who has a slight cold might have 0.98 quality or 0.97 quality, depending on the severity of the cold. So they have the vast majority of their quality of life, presuming that it doesn't develop into something worse. What are the components of quality? One is the length of life. That's how many years you live. So if you're thinking of someone who has gotten, and I'll go into specific case studies later in this presentation, so you'll be able to get flavor of what I'm talking about. But if you're talking about the measured in years lived, the length of somebody's life. If someone who is a young person gets a permanent injury, and then they're expected to still live a long time, that's going to be a lot of quality lost. Someone is older, they're not expected to live as long, it's going to be less years of quality lost. Longevity. That's so that longevity is crucial. Another, of course, is the quality. What is the quality of life? And the quality of life is really what you'll be looking at. So when you're trying to evaluate, hey, if you're dealing with a personal injury, and if you're a plaintiff's lawyer, but also even if you're a defense lawyer, you're thinking about how long will they live and what's their quality of life using peer-reviewed research on how much a specific type of health intervention, like blindness, some disease, disability, mental anguish, emotional distress, how much does that distract from your quality of life? And that includes physical, mental, and social well-being. So again, withdrawal from social relationships. If, let's say, someone is scarred badly and one case I'm dealing with right now, it's a little girl who was scarred pretty badly and she's not experiencing physical pain, but she's being socially ostracized and thus experiencing bad social well-being and emotional abuse, not emotional abuse, emotional distress because of that scarring as a result of an injury. And so that's an example that physically she's not currently experiencing pain, but she's experiencing mental distress, some harm to mental well-being and social well-being. Formula for quality combines both. It's the length of life times the quality of life. Just like I explained earlier, with blindness, that's going to be for a year, that's going to be zero point 0.5 for the quality of life and 1 for the length of life. So quality is measured in years, quality adjusted life years, but you can also measure it in months. And so that's what you'll want to do. What's quality in general? Where did it come from? Like, where's it stem? What is the origin of it? It was developed in the 1960s. So it's a very, very old metric. It's over 80 years old by health economists. Initial purpose was to assess the value of medical interventions, meaning if you if you prevent someone from being blind by, let's say, addressing cataract surgery, how much benefit does somebody get? How much does their quality of life improve? And so that is what it was originally used for. Now it's increasingly adopted by public health and health economists, by all sorts of economists, by government officials, for policymaking, for resource allocation of all sorts. So it's used extensively right now in all sorts of contexts. Standard quality evaluation. So for the US in 2025, the standard quality is about $165,000. So the assumption is that a year in full health is worth $165,000 on average. So that's the average standard. What's the basis for that? The typical life value is valued at 13,200,000 by the US government. And that's inflation adjusted, so it's going to be a little bit more over time, and so it changes over time. But that's a typical life value. So if you go to the US government website for, let's say, Highway Administration and look at what is the statistical value of life, you will find that that's the typical statistical value of life. 13.2 million, maybe a little bit higher right now due to inflation. So 165,000. It's going to be average life expectancy of 80 years. So the calculation is that 13,200,000 divided by 80 years is 165,000. So per year of healthy life, you get 165,000, or it's worth 165,000 for an average American for healthy quality of life 1 year. Now, how much do various problems caused by injuries harm quality of life? So let's say somebody got into a bad injury or another case I'm dealing with, I'll show you, is someone experienced discrimination in the workplace and they are now depressed as a result. So if they had no diagnosis of depression, but then they got a diagnosis of depression as a result of an injury or some kind of action by an employer or something for which you can basically sue, then this is going to be a good example for you to think about using quality. But there are going to be a number of other cases, of course, and I'll walk through them, but I'm going to go through this one in depth because depression is typically something that's hard to evaluate for a personal injury lawyer, or if you are defending against a personal injury lawsuit, for a defense lawyer. So this is a study, and I'll send you the slides for those who want it. Again, I think I put in the chat, and you can remember that it's going to be tinyurl.com/DAEEVENT for those who want to get the slides and all the citations, all the reports that are going to be in them as a result. Now, this is the study that talks about incremental decreases in quality adjusted life years associated with higher levels of depressive symptoms for US adults aged 65 years and older. So, 65 years and older because they were looking at Medicare. And of course, you'll want, if your adult that you're dealing with is not 65 years and older, this will be a little bit less relevant, but it will still be quite relevant. And you can find studies like this for somebody who's younger than 65. But this is just for 65 years and older. So, what's the study? It examines quality loss due to depressive symptoms. The study overview. It analyzed data from the CDC, Center for Disease Control, again, Medicare, 3,680 adults. It's a pretty large study from 2005 to 2011. Examined the association between QALY and depression. Measured via scores on the PHQ-9. So if you know anything about, you've dealt with therapists, you'll be quite familiar with the PHQ-9. It's the most commonly used patient depression questionnaire, PHQ-9. Highly standardized, highly credible, verified way of measuring whether someone has depression and how bad it is. Non-minimal is going to be 0 for 4, mild depression 5 for 9, moderate depression 10 to 14, moderate to severe and severe is 15 plus. So that's the differences in the depression. Now, what are the study results? What did it find? It found that the average QALY lived from the start of the study evaluation period for each depression severity category, so 25 to 2011. Non-minimal, 14 QALY. So if somebody had none or minimal, so that's again 0 for 4, they had 14 QALY. Okay? Mild, 7.8 QALY. So what do you see? That pretty significant drop if you're going from zero depression to non-minimal, essentially zero, to mild, to the span of range between mild and moderate, which is 5 for 9. So it's going to be 7.8 quality. So you're losing something like about 45% of your quality of life through even having mild depression. Moderate depression is going to be even further, 4.7 quality. So if you're losing, going from 14 quality to 14 to 4.7 quality, you're losing something like about 60% of your quality of life. And moderate severe to severe is 3.3 quality. That's closer to 70% of your quality of life lost. So that quantifies emotional distress. If you have someone who, as a result of an injury, or as a result of employment discrimination, or civil rights discrimination, or anything like that, if they have been diagnosed, if they did not have depression before, but they have now been diagnosed with depression, you can make a credible, highly credible argument that they have lost a substantial amount of their quality of life, and you can mathematically represent exactly how much quality of life they have lost to go to the witness, to the jury, and say, here's how much quality of life they've lost as a result of this depression. Here's what the research shows. Here's what the science says. So major depressive disorder is called 8.3%, is 8.3 per fewer QALY. That's moderate to moderate, severe, severe. So it's going to be the bottom two categories. So moderate to moderate, severe, and severe. That's going to be 645% loss. So that's a pretty standard diagnosis, not standard, but a lot of the diagnosis of depression will be about MDD, major depressive disorder. And so if someone has major depressive disorder, that's going to be a 65% loss of their quality of life. If mild depression, that's going to be a 44% loss. So that's mild depression. So again, depends on what kind of depression. And the patterns are consistent across demographics and comorbidities. This is what the study says. What does that mean? It means that if you are black, white, woman, man, if we're going to be different ages spread across the 65, 75, 85, that's going to be pretty standardized. This is going to still accurately represent your loss. Comorbidities means if you have something else that's going on, if you have cancer or some other diseases that are happening at the same time, that's not going to be influencing these numbers of the quality of loss due to depression. So the patterns are consistent. Implications is that every year of major depressive disorder means 107,000 loss. So 165,000 per QALY for year of life in perfect health times 65% of QALY lost means that for each year major depressive disorder that someone has suffered and is expected to suffer while they're recovering from the depression is something for which you can ask $107,000. So the cost patient experiencing the disorder is over $107,000 per year. Other studies provide similar evaluation evidence for mental distress and physical injuries. So I'm just went through mental and I just went through emotional distress because it's the kind of thing that's hardest to quantify for people. But you can see it's very quantifiable. Other peer-reviewed studies support impact of depression on quality-adjusted life years in older adults with depressive symptoms and chronic medical conditions. That's going to be another one. Followed older adults for 4 years, found that depression is one of the worst medical conditions decreasing quality, just below arthritis and heart disease. So it's even worse than cancer. Only arthritis and heart disease lowered quality more than depression. Okay, let's talk about the PHQ-9 so that picky judges are not going to pick on you when they say, is this an actual appropriate assessment for quality? There's a research looking at estimating qualities based on PHQ-9 scores. So, obtained randomized control trials that administered depression screening tools as well as the EQ-5930. Now, what's the EQ-5930? It's another standardized test. That's not for depression, that's for quality. So how do you measure quality? You use tests like EQ-5930. So again, standardized, highly credible, widely used to measure quality of life. It found that depression screening tools like PHQ-9 accurately correspond to EQ-5930. That validates use of PHQ-9 in assessing qualities lost due to depression. So you don't need to just, theorize that, hey, somebody lost this much quality. If somebody has a certain score on PHQ-9, that's going to correlate to loss of quality based on highly standardized scientific evaluations of quality of life. So that's why peer-reviewed research supports quality analysis of depression. Talk about quality in legal cases, how it provides objective evidence for legal compensation. So you could see how it could be highly useful for you. It demonstrates the clinical importance and statistical significance. So clinical importance, looking at the PHQ-9 and so on, and statistical significance because all the studies that I cite are found to be statistically significant. It helps lawyers use quality support claims for physical injury damages, emotional distress damages, objective measures of emotional harm and mental harm. And so you want to apply findings to enhance case credibility and defensibility. The Daubert standard. Of course, you know about the Daubert standard. It's a legal precedent for expert witness testimony. It's used by judges to assess reliability and relevance. Criteria, testability. Theory can be tested. The theory has been peer-reviewed, known or potentially known error rates. There are existing standards, and it's generally accepted in the academic or other expert community. In this case, academic and public health economists and public policy experts and US government officials. So quality is easily meets the Daubert standard. It's testable. It's a testable metric in health economics. It's peer-reviewed, extensively reviewed in scientific literature. Standardized methods minimize any error rates. There are established guidelines for quality calculation, which I showed you. There is a very highly credible standardized test that's been extensively validated, the EQ-5930. And it's widely accepted in public health, health economics, government policy, and so on. Now, expert witness testimony. Quality provides quantifiable health outcomes. It provides a clear framework for emotional distress and physical damage, and it ensures consistency and with rigorous scientific methods to help you simplify complex health evaluations for the jury. So, lots of benefits for quality. But let's talk about some case studies so that you could see how quality is actually applied. That bounced me out. All right. So you should be able to see this report. Expert witness report by Charlene Chapman against Everett University. Then another one for Mr. Raymond Nolasco. This was, anyway, I'll talk about that. And another one for the city of Maryland, state of Maryland. So these are all cases where I'm expert witness, and I'll show you the expert witness report, how you use it. So what's up with Mr. Nolasco? So he is a little bit older now, 34-year-old logistics specialist suffering severe polytrauma in motorcycle collision, including bilateral displaced communicated wrist fractures that required open reduction, internal fixation, right clavicle fracture, multiple right-sided rib fractures, and a pneumothorax treated with a chest tube. So pretty bad injury that resulted from a motorcycle collision. Pretty typical personal injury lawsuit. The subsequent evaluations documented persistent pain, vertigo, sleep disturbance, potential PTSD, and weight gain that together impede activities of daily living and restrict him to light duty work. There's a medical report that calculated a specific disability profile with standardized exams, DASH 55, Pain Disability Questionnaire 93, and ASES 55, which all signal moderate to severe functional loss and pain interference. The assessment shows that Mr. Nolasco faces significant lifelong loss of health with only limited recovery potential, substantial ongoing medical expenses, and profound quality of life reductions attributable to the crash-related injuries. So that's what we're dealing with here. So pretty standard, pretty standard case here of personal injury. Let's look at the nature of how we're looking at the case. So methodology is using the QALY methodology, both the duration and severity of emotional pain, and harm. So explain the QALY. I'm not going to go through it here through the expert witness report because you just heard about it. So we talked about the US government valuing it, and you could see research on this topic. Like if you want to look it up, Standard Analytical Value of Benefit Cost Analysis of Government Programs 2024 from the Department of Health and Human Services. Okay, so he has chronic pain, orthopedic injuries, neurological and vestibular sequela, sleep disturbance, PTSD. Okay, so chronic pain. He's assumed to have entered a collision with no chronic pain, so therefore 1 QALY per year. His current pain disability questionnaire score of 59 places him in the severe or high impacted chronic pain category. This evaluation is over 5 months after the accident. Additional recovery would be limited, especially considering that Mr. Nolasco already attended physical therapy. So substantial long-term reduction in health-related quality is expected. So then we look at peer-reviewed evidence. Multiple studies converge on typical utilities between 0.4 and 0.5 for adults reporting severe daily pain, meaning they lose 50 to 60% of their quality of life, down from 1 per year to 0.4 to 0.5. So average EQ 5.9, you remember that test, index in respondents with chronic severe pain lower by 0.57 compared to pain-free controls, suggesting an increase of 57% from baseline. Another is 64%. I try to use the more conservative estimates when they're possible. So for the 6 months from the injury until the PDS assessment, he lost 57% of his quality of life. Now, what can we anticipate? So research shows that chronic pain is difficult to cure once it has lasted as long as his has. So you have immediate pain, but for it to be chronic, it has to last for months. And this was already at 6 months. So deploying the standard of care best practices, research from Eklund et al., so you need to look at the research and cite it, have shown some promise, with one study finding that this intervention significantly improved quality for those with chronic pain from 0.34 to 0.44 at 1 year follow-up. So based on that, we say that his pain may decrease from him losing 57% of his quality to 47% of his quality over the next year, from April 2025 to April 2026. Okay, Montel et al. Found that about half of those with chronic pain still report chronic pain over the next 11 years, and after 11 years, any recovery is unlikely. Therefore, we should expect that he has a 50% chance of recovering over the remaining years of his life. So we assume that he will lose 23.5% of his health due to chronic pain in the period of 43.2 years, which is his expected remainder of his life. So it's 47% that he has quality of life times 50%. That's the 50% chance of recovery. Okay, so we're evaluating that. What about the wrist injury? So, so we have chronic pain. Separately and distinctly, we have wrist injury. And with DASH scores, disabilities of arm, shoulder, and head, 56, American Shoulder and Elbow Surgeon score of 55. Now, Rosberg et al. Is a study that measured EQ-5/9 utilities in patients with head and arm injuries climbing from roughly 0.71 at 3 months to 0.75 at 6, then 0.81 at 12, as their median DASH fell from 30 to 17 to 12. But his score is significantly higher, meaning worse, 56. So we should assume that due to the wrist injury, he's going to lose 35% over the 6 months prior to the examination. And then going along with that standard, over the 9 months, his DASH score will fall from 56 to 30, so experience less of a loss in health, and he would experience less of a loss in health. Then happens at that point? They found that while all patients treated report minimal symptoms and follow-up, 57% of all patients treated operatively noted symptoms. He was treated operatively. Things belongs in the latter category. So he has a 57% chance of having a quality loss of 19% for the remaining 42.8 years of his life, or total expected loss of 11% of his quality of life. All right. So vertigo, I'm not going to go through each of these, but he's going to basically, he lost 36% of his quality of life, likely lose another 18% of his quality of life due to vertigo over a period of recovery. Sleep disturbance, 17% of his quality of life due to sleep disturbance so far. Over the remaining years of his life, we expect that he'll lose 7% of his health. The last point is PTSD. So Dr. Reed is not a psychiatrist. He said it needs an official diagnosis, but he suspects he may have PTSD. Now, PTSD results in an average loss of 34% over the quality of life. And so we can estimate 50%, 4% chance that he will recover anytime from 2 to 10 years, 46% chance that he will continue with PTSD throughout the rest of his life. All right, quality evaluation. So we look at each period and we multiply that together, combining the remaining quality of life. So the chronic severe pain, he has 43% quality of utility left. Utility is quality of life. That's another way of expressing it. Then you multiply 43% by 65% his remaining quality of life. Vertigo, 64%, insomnia, leaving 83%. So 0.4, 0.65, 0.64 times 0.83 is 15%. So over 6 months, this equates to a quality loss of 0.4 to 0.43 quality. So 70,200 was the request for the first period of quality loss. Over 6 months, the next period is 15 times 66% that he'll have if he has PTSD present. So we still don't know about this period. If he has PTSD present, then it would be instead of 70,000, the request would be 74,000, or the expected loss would be 74,000. And he would only have 10% of his quality of life. Next phase. So you do the same sort of math, and you figure out that over 1 year, you'll have a loss of 0.71 quality. So he has 29% of his quality of life. He's recovering from 15% to 29%. That's 116,000 for 1 year. And this is if he has PTSD, he would have 19%. So that instead we would ask for 133,000. So this is still pending the final diagnosis from a psychiatrist. And then the next period, you do the same sort of math, 6 months, So again, he's recovering. He's at 55% quality of life now. We're expecting that. That's going to be a request of 36,000, or if he has PTSD, a request of 51,000. Remaining lifetime. We expect that after he recovers, so that's going to be within the next 2 years, the remaining combined utility of his quality of life is going to be reduced by about a third, just over a third, as a result of this accident. And so that's going to be a request of 2.5 million. If PTSD, that would be an additional 765,000. And so a total of 2.65 million. And so here we have the combined table. If 2.8 million essentially without PTSD and 3.6 million with PTSD. So that's how you go through and you calculate QALY. So that's a calculation of QALY as a result of a personal injury. Now, let me show you a different example here. So I told you about bias as another way that you want to think about addressing QALY. So I was retained as an expert in this matter to evaluate the evidence surrounding Ms. Chapman's claims of race and disability discrimination, retaliation, and resulting emotional harm during her employment at Everett University. So she was an African American who was discriminated against, and then she had some trauma as a response to that. So let me show you what that looks like. So she has a progressively worsening cardiac condition, placing her at increased risk under sustained stress or exposure to strenuous work conditions. And she initially had mild symptoms. Then they didn't care about that, and they basically put more and more stress on her. An enlarged heart is predisposed to elevated risk under stress. Severe anxiety gave her a sense of panic attacks, and so on. All of these problems. So this was for my previous presentation relevant to that and bias. So again, bias and discrimination is part of my area of expertise in decision making. So you can take a look at my previous webinar for the Maine State Bar Association, Maine on bias. Here's ADA accommodation analysis. The one is about racism and bias. This is about ADA, which again is part of the bias, my area of expertise. And QALY methodology, which is today's topic. So, emotional distress. So what happened with her? She visited a psychiatrist to evaluate her ongoing mental challenges and address emotional distress. The psychiatric evaluation documented 4 concurrent disorders attributable to the university's actions: moderately severe depression, PTSD, generalized anxiety disorder, and recurring panic attacks. So all of those. And so here was the diagnosis for each of them: major depressive disorder, annual loss 107, remaining QALY is 0.35 times the loss of another percentage, 31% loss is 0.11 left, remaining QALY 0.24 times a loss of 0.08. So the total annual QALY loss is 0.84 as a result of her mental and emotional distress. So it's 138,000. And so through April 2024, that's 10 months, and it's 138,000 per year. Through April 2024, that's an expected loss of 115,000. But mental and emotional distress in legal case cannot be resolved until the case reaches its conclusion. So we expect that she will still suffer another 6 to 12 months while her case is ongoing. If it's 6 months, it's going to be another 69,000. If it's 12 months, another 138,000. Then in terms of the healing process, so complex comorbidities, research shows that those individuals living with anxiety disorders can take as long as 12 years, reveal low rates of recovery and high probability of recurrence. So we expect her to lose around another 369 to 508,000 years health as a result of what the psychiatrist described as the hostile actions of Everett University. So that's the situation of how you can evaluate and manage quality and address it and show how it impacts physical health and impacts emotional health alike. And I'll send you these expert witness reports so you have more information on that. Okay, so I hope you found this webinar helpful. So the key takeaways is that you need to understand mental anguish and emotional distress and chronic pain, and the challenges in subjective evaluation come from it. We talked about the introduction to the quality metric and legal evaluations with some real-world examples, and I discussed the strategies for presenting quality in court. For additional resources, so again, if you're watching this, especially in the recording, you should go to tinyurl.com/TAEEVENT, or you can type it in right now if you're not watching this on the recording and request my resources. So the resources will be a link to the slides, a copy of my best-selling book on addressing mental distress, emotional distress, overcoming unconscious bias, and I'll have a free coaching for integrating these strategies into your work if that will be helpful. And of course, as I mentioned, the copies of the expert witness reports. And for those who are present right now on the webinar, and you are welcome to indicate on the poll if you would like to get these resources. Again, if you're watching this as a recording, go to tinyurl.com/DAEEVENT to get the resources. So again, tinyurl.com/DAEEVENT. And I'll be happy to take any questions at this stage.
So with a small group, if you want to take yourself off mute, you can do that and
Yeah,
ask a
happy to
question
do that.
or put it in the chat and we Dr. Gleb can answer them from there.
Mhm.
I have a question, Doctor.
Yeah.
Are your analyses ever challenged that when you combine three different diagnoses that you are overstating the result, meaning if you're combining depressive disorder with anxiety with PTSD?
Great question. So, how that's done in quality analysis, and it's not just me, it's just a standardized approach. When you're looking at comorbidities, when they're together, you multiply one by the other. So let's say if you have major depressive disorder, you're losing about 65% of your quality of life, you have 35% of your quality of life left. Okay, then what happens, let's say if you have PTSD, then you are losing another 34% of your quality of life. So you had 30.35 left, 0.35 qualities left. Then you multiply that by the 0.34 and you subtract the result. So you have 0.35 times 0.34 would be something like 0.9, 0.09. So you subtract from the 0.35, which was the quality of life, minus 0.09. You don't just subtract, you don't add them together. You multiply them by each other in order to address exactly what you're saying so that you're not double counting elements of physical health because somebody who is already at lost 35%, lost 65% of their quality of life is not at perfect health. So you can't just say, well, they're losing 0.34 quality. No, they're losing 34% of their current quality of life.
Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, that's what the complex math for Mr. Nolasco was about, for evaluating each of these elements and adding them together. That's part of the tricky aspect of evaluating quality. You can't just add it up. You get more than 100.
Right.
There's a question in the chat if you see it.
Yes. Absolutely. So what I'm talking about is specifically not wages. Distinct would be what Mr. Nolasco or Ms. Chapman or others would have earned during that time. And that's a completely separate question. And so, yes, I definitely clarify that to the jury. This is not about wages. This is just about their quality of life, completely separate and distinct from how much they would have earned during the period. Other folks, other questions?
Yes, you mentioned at the beginning that you could present this quality matter through expert opinion or otherwise. And I don't know
Yep.
how you could get it in otherwise without an expert opinion. Have you seen judges take judicial notice? I mean, what are you referencing?
The lawyer presenting this to the jury as an argument for like, so right now, I mean, I've definitely seen lawyers presenting this to the jury as an argument without an expert witness. If you are going to one approach, the typical approach is saying that like, oh, hey, how would you feel if this happened to you? And having the injured victim describe their experiences, right? That's one approach. Another approach would be to say, in addition to that, would be to say, here's what the evidence on the research on this topic says about the quality of life and how much someone, if they have a major depressive disorder, how much do they actually lose in their terms of their quality of life? And you just do the research. I guess you have now this webinar, you have my article in the Maine State Bar Association journal that gives you all the studies. So you can look up these studies and you can do this math and evaluation yourself from that because you're relying on the research literature. So absolutely you can do that.
Thank you.
Sure.
Another question from Christopher in the chat.
Yes, so for Christopher, absolutely. So you need someone who's a doctor or a psychologist or a psychiatrist to provide the actual underlying medical opinion. Because then, so what I do, and what you should be doing if you don't want to hire an expert witness, is you can go and say, okay, here the psychiatrist said that as a result of this you have they develop PTSD. That means that they lost 35% of their quality of life, and the quality of life, according to the US government, is $165,000 per year. And we expect that recovery will take 5 years based on X, Y, and Z. And so they have lost the five times whatever it would be, $60,000, $300,000 a year is what we're requesting for the PTSD. And so you want the underlying opinion by a therapist or psychiatrist or a doctor, if it's going to be, let's say, the AC score, how much disability somebody has and how long it will should take to recover, or if they won't recover, what's the probability that they won't recover, and then math that probability and combine that to evaluate the quality loss. So life expectancy, that's going to be based on table data. So if you are going to look at, let's say, Maine, or you want to look at your demographic, so let's say white women in Maine, what's their life expectancy? And then just looking at what your local demographic is, that's divided by appropriate ethnic, racial categories that's typically used for life expectancy, that there's no challenge there. That's not something that the opposing counsel will challenge you on.
Other questions? Not not seeing anything coming through. Um, so I'd like to say thank you very much, Dr. Cypersky, for being here today. Thank you all for being here today. Just so you know, we will report your attendance and credits to the Board of Overseers within 30 days of this event. It should be sooner than that. We are catching up on credits. We have had a lot of programs, so we're working hard to catch up on credits. But if you have any questions of me, don't hesitate to reach out to me here at the MSBA as well. My name's James Westhoff. Again, thank you so much, Dr. Cypersky. Thank you, everybody. Hope you all have a great Thanksgiving as well. And don't forget, can I do one shameless plug? Legal Year in Review is next Thursday if you're interested in it. Registration is for the live event at the Augusta Civic Center is open till Monday at midnight. So if you're interested in going to that, please register if you haven't. So again, thank you, Dr. Cypersky. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks, James.
Thank you, Doctor. Very
You're
informative.
welcome. Thank you all. That is helpful.
Thanks
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.